Welcome back and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I am Kenneth Shark Kinney, your host and Chief Shark Officer. First, let me tell you about two amazing sponsors who make this show possible, and I'm a rather particular shark and I only work with the best. First of all, let's talk about Inbound. I've worked with a great team at Invoca for several years now, from marketing to sales to commerce to CX. Invoca's active conversation intelligence platform enables revenue teams to create better buying experiences, drive more leads, and increase revenue. Trusted by top brands like Dish Network, Mayo Clinic, Mutual of Omaha, Pods, and SunTrust, the Invoca team are doing some amazing work in turning conversational data into automated action to enhance digital touchpoints and human interaction. Secondly, let's talk about Outbound. I've known and worked with AC's team and Drips for years. Take a look at Drips, the founders of conversational texting, where they use conversational AI to help you reach customers where they're most responsive, and that's on their phones. And working with major brands like 3-Day Blinds, Liberty Mutual, Credit Repair, and Gainsco, Dripsco is leading the way for some of the biggest brands in the world to improve engagement rates and outcomes for their prospects and customers. Thank you, Invoca and Drips. And now back to the show. Are you vigilant, ever aware of your surroundings and knowing what your competition is doing to take your customers away? Or are you complacent and vulnerable to being defeated by the competition? It's a question that all brands should ask and better manage. Lynn Herstein is the CEO and president of Manage Camp, the founder of the Brand Manage Camp Conference and the Brand Manage Camp University, the author of Be Vigilant, Strategies to Stop Complacency, Improve Performance, and Safeguard Success. And he also serves as a reserve sheriff's deputy in Douglas County, Colorado. And on this episode, we'll discuss marketing and branding, some CPG soup and crackers, Clubhouse, audio, being more intentional about your use of sound, serving as a reserve sheriff's deputy, conferences in person and learning online, being vigilant, complacency, handshakes and vulnerability, and a lot more. So let's tune into a camp counselor branding, if you will, with a shark who gets my counsel in the water on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. Tell us a little bit about your background and your career to date so far.
Yeah, it's been a long and windy one for sure. I started out in consulting. Used to work for Anderson Consulting, which is now Accenture, doing programming in COBOL 2.
Oh wow!
Which actually, I was just reading this stuff still being managed in COBOL 2.
All right, so let me ask you this: were you a DB2 or an IMS guy?
Oh, I can't. I was bad at it. I can tell you that.
just yeah, gotcha.
I was bad at it. So I moved over to the change management side, which was more people consulting and helping people through those changes. Went back.
Thank
to
goodness you
business school.
escaped.
Yeah, exactly. And then I got into marketing and worked in traditional consumer packaged goods brand marketing for first Nabisco, and then Coca-Cola, and then Campbell Soup Company, both in base business and innovation, sales roles, marketing roles, and then jumped on the .com thing for a little bit in between there somewhere, and eventually found myself going to a lot of conferences that I found myself coming home early from, and there was a lot of things bothering me about the conference industry. My wife got tired of hearing me complain about it and told me to do something about it, and I haven't been married 23 years without listening to my wife. So I did that, and that's where I created a company called Manage Camp. We do an annual Brand Manage Camp conference, marketing conference that we've been doing. This will be our 19th year. We're doing it virtually right now, obviously, but I hope to get back to live soon. And about 6 years ago, I became a reserve sheriff's deputy here in Douglas County, Colorado. And I do that. I went through a full training academy and field training program, and I'm a fully certified field patrol deputy. I just do it for free. I've been doing that for 6 years, and that experience combined with my over 25 now 30 years of marketing experience and brand and business experience led me to my book that I have coming out in hopefully in September. It's called Be Vigilant, Strategies to Stop Complacency, Improve Performance, and Safeguard Success. And it's all about this concept of complacency and how complacency kills, not only in law enforcement, but in business and relationships and marriages and brands, and what actionable things that you can do every day to help fight that complacency and be more vigilant. That is my less than 3 minute synopsis of my life.
Well, first of all, especially because I've had family do this as well, and have been reserved sheriff's deputies. Thank you, one, for your service,
Ah, my pleasure. Thank
especially considering what you do for free.
you.
That has always amazed me. The first time I heard anybody doing that, it impressed me that much more that somebody would do that to serve without asking for anything in return.
Makes you question the validity of this psych evaluation they put
Yeah,
me through.
yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Exactly. So what we were talking about earlier, we met through Clubhouse,
yeah.
through a Clubhouse room with a mutual friend of ours. And I really wanted to talk to you because as we discussed before, about what the value is of Clubhouse and who is there. I think a lot of the conversation that's changed since you were working for these large brands versus where a lot of people have positioned themselves today. It's
Uh-huh.
not really focused on serving the brand unless the brand is you. When you look at places like Clubhouse or any of the other social channels, how do you look at brands today and a lot of the education that's out there,
Yeah.
including with your own conference, versus what is really consuming a lot of the oxygen in the room
Yeah.
with sort of the self brand conversation?
This all gets back to a lot of what I do today is built on my experiences and the people that I've met and the things that I've learned. And Brand Manage Camp as a conference, providing me 19 years of access to some of the greatest minds in brand have shaped the way I think. And so what you're asking for me leads me back to a gentleman by the name of Bruce Turkel. And Bruce is an advertising guy out of Florida, out of Miami. I don't know if you know Bruce, but he talks about a thing. What he says is it's all about them, right? And I think this is a universal concept that you can use in life, in brand, in business, in Clubhouse, in social media, and whatever you do. That I think over and over and over again people lose sight of. They lose sight of it when they're up on stage. They lose sight of it when they're trying to sell a product to somebody. They lose sight of it when they're doing advertising. And the whole idea is it's not about us, right? It's about them. It's about the customer. It's about the consumer. It's about the recipient of your information and what's in it for them, right? And how do we stay focused on that? I think brands have learned over time. We went from this idea of blogging, right, which was like us regurgitating information, and advertising, right, throwing information out, and then social media came on, and the whole thing is now it's a two-way street. Now there's a conversation, right? And that conversation, when it becomes about me, becomes less interesting than when that conversation is about you, right? And I think that's probably, you mentioned Clubhouse. I think that's a kind of a learning curve that's happening with Clubhouse right now. You and I were talking before we went live here about Clubhouse and how I've dabbled a little bit, but I really have not jumped in with 2 feet by any stretch of the imagination. But I can tell you from what I've seen so far, it's a lot about me, not me particular, but whoever's
Right, right.
talking, whether they're the person running the room or the person raising their hand to say something. A lot of it is, look at me, how about me, here's what I have to say. And there's not a lot about making it about them. And I think that'll change over time. And especially as people are thinking about what are brands' relationship with Clubhouse or TikTok or whatever people want to talk about these days in terms of how do brands get involved. Eventually it's all going to come back to that very, very simple concept. If you make it about them, people will come, people will listen, people will engage. You'll hopefully drive that goal of forming relationships as opposed to driving transactions, right? And if you make it about what's about me, now if you're a celebrity and people are super interested about you, that could work, right? But if you're not, like I'm not, or brands aren't, you have to eventually make that transition and say, okay, enough of us talking about us. What do these people need to know, and how can we be a part of providing them solutions, providing them answers, providing them insights, or anything that they need to make their lives better.
So, talk a little bit about what the conference does as a whole that's different, say, from other conferences with Brand Managed Camp Conference.
Yeah. So Brand Managed Camp, it's funny because back in 2003, I was coming back from a conference in New Orleans, and it was just another one of these events that, back in those days, you actually had travel agents that you called within, or travel departments within your company, right? And you'd call and you'd say, hey, get me on an earlier flight. I got to get out of here, right? And it was one of those conferences where you show up and, they serve breakfast, but breakfast was like, a cold bagel, and they provided a toaster, for you to do something with that bagel. And, someone showed up with a Mac and forgot their dongle, and the whole thing shut down for like 25 minutes. Right. So, I was just tired. I was tired because all these events looked great on paper. But then in execution, they were not delivering what I was looking for. Forget about all those executional things, but, they were set up more for sponsors than they were for attendees, right? There were a lot of panel discussions with a lot of people on there so they could pad, their attendance list so they could sell more sponsorships. There were people trying to sell me every which way I moved, right? And that's not what I was looking for. They started moving into these things where there were multiple, tracks to choose from, right? And now all of a sudden, like, it's like more complicated than picking my college syllabus, right? And there's all this fear of missing out and all that stuff. So when I started Brand Manage Camp, I was on a flight home from this conference in New Orleans, and I was writing on the back of a US Air napkin that tells you how long ago this was, because they don't exist anymore.
Right.
And I was writing down what the next conference I was going to go to had to have. And those simple principles is what Brand Manage Camp is still based around. So it had to be a single track conference. It had to be flawlessly executed. It had to have all keynote speakers, no panel discussions. It had to be about learning and not about selling. So attendee focused and not sponsor focused. It had to have great food and great drink and comfortable places and great audio visual with no hiccups. And it had to be a 360-degree view of brand. I didn't want something that was going to be super specific where everybody was going to be saying the same thing or saying the same thing differently for 2 days. I wanted a 360-degree view of brand where we had lots of different really brilliant people talking about lots of different things that applied to a general management focused brand management professional, someone who runs brands, someone who has P&L responsibility for brands. And that's still what Brand Manage Camp is all about. If you look at our agenda, we don't have people overlapping. We don't have tracks to choose from. Now that we're in, virtual, at least for the short term, we are still focused on flawless execution and making it so that people get the most, not just taking our live conference and making it, a virtual conference, but redesigning it to be optimized for virtual. So all those same principles that I wrote down, all those years ago still hold true.
So talk a little bit further about the 360 view of the brand, because I saw that on the website as well. And having worked on the brand side, I think this is extremely important. So many of the different conferences, as you said, obviously you've got them now dedicated to certain channels or certain tactics or certain things. And one of the things I think I get not in arguments with, but just the different ways to look at it is, if you're responsible for a brand, and I have been multiple times before, you have to diversify. You can't be so niched to where somebody can put you in a box and call you an expert in it. And although that's important, and you have to have a really rich amount of knowledge, if you're serving a customer, you've got to look at it through their lens, which is that 360 view of the brand, not just how do I do on Facebook or TikTok or my SEO or everything else. And so I think that's extremely interesting, but kind of elaborate, if you will, on how you see that view of the brand and the audience that brands serve.
Yeah, I mean, this came from my training in traditional consumer packaged goods marketing. So when you go to a company like Nabisco or Coca-Cola or Campbell Soup or General Mills or Clorox or Colgate or whatever it is, right? Procter and Gamble, they all have a similar way that they look at brand marketing, and that is with the marketers at what they would call the hub of the wheel, right? And so you've got marketing at the hub of the wheel, and you've got all these spokes coming out of it: advertising, design, manufacturing, distribution, packaging, finance, right? Operations, sales, all these things come out of it. Most of those do not report directly into marketing. They have their own reporting structures, but the marketer, as a general management, brand marketer, is, indirectly responsible for providing the direction that all those people come back into, marketing in an indirect way. And so when you consider marketing that, and you don't consider marketing one specific thing, social media, digital marketing, advertising, whatever it is, you have a much more holistic view of what marketing is. And that's why it's called brand manage camp. It's not marketing manage camp, right? Brand, because it's everything as it relates to managing that brand. And you know what? The financials of that brand, market research, social media, all those things have a place to play. And so that's what I wanted Brand Manage Camp to be. I wanted Brand Manage Camp to be the place where the people at the helm of making those decisions could come to find out what's next, to stay one step ahead of their competition, to learn how to better connect with their consumers and customers, to better manage, grow, build more profitable brands, and become more profitable leaders, and also bring their team members, which all have different places to play within that wheel, to come together as well, so that they could see it from each other's different perspectives.
So talk a little bit about Brand Management University. I'm assuming that's basically an online extension to continuous learning throughout the year to learn a lot of these principles.
Yeah, so Brand Manage Camp U, or Brand Manage Camp University, is basically, where we've taken us now that things have gone virtual, right? So, it used to be that Brand Manage Camp was a one point in time event, but now that things are virtual, it's a different world. And so it's a 365, day a year, right? It is a way for people to continue to interact with our content. We are delivering content weekly. So we just did a new live stream this morning, and we're doing live streams pretty much every week. And then that becomes part of our content library. We have our past keynotes in our content library. We have new keynotes that come in that are just part of that. And so Brand Manage Camp University is our way of delivering a year-round learning experience for the people who come to our conference.
So you, as a former CPG marketer, and now as somebody who's running a conference for it, where do you see what is broken and what is succeeding holistically, at least from what you think of as best practices or best knowledge that people are giving? Because so much of the knowledge that's being put out there, like, typically somebody from Campbell Soup or Nabisco is not going to be speaking and telling the world how to do great things with your marketing. It's going to be somebody that works at XYZ agency. Kind of elaborate on what you're seeing that's working and what's not working as far as general knowledge that you see going out there today.
One of the things that we see, because we have people coming from all industries, all categories, is that, whenever someone's winning, someone else is losing, right? And so we see people succeeding and doing really well right now, and we see people not doing well. And it's hard to say what is that one thing, because, there's two sides to every coin. I mean, I think, the big thing right now, and why I'm super excited about my book about complacency and vigilance, is that I think one of the biggest problems that I've seen is people, organizations, brands getting complacent, right? And this year blew that up, right? Because complacency works as long as everything continues to go well. When stuff goes wrong, that's when you start to see what you've been missing, right? And I think a lot of folks have not stayed up to date on staying in tune with what their customer wants, staying in tune with what their customer and consumer's life is about, staying in tune with how do they communicate with them, staying in tune with what's considered competition, right? And all those things go fine until something goes wrong. And this year, shit went wrong. Excuse my language, right? And so now we're starting to see who's really able to adapt and change in ways that benefit their ecosystem, in ways that benefit their customers and their consumers and their vendors and their suppliers and all that. Those are the people that are winning. The people that are not able to change, the people that are stuck in their ways, that are not seeing those changes coming or have any mechanism for being aware of those changes coming, those, so if I was going to make a generalization, that would be the one.
One of the things I thought was interesting, and obviously we talked about this beforehand, but you work for these large CPG brands and then went to work for Audio Brain. Audrey Urbini, I really like what they've been doing, especially from Sonic Branding. She's fantastic. Previous episode on my show as well. But how do you look at audio today, sort of your 30,000 foot view of what brands should be tapping into more as far as leveraging audio?
Yeah, and so like you said, Audrey Arbini from Audio Brain, she's awesome. She's been involved with our conference since very very early on, and so we've worked together for a really long time. And then we kind of created this like, hey, why don't we work together on Audio Brain as well? And so that's where that came from. But I've been a big believer in that, and we've been using her services for a long time. I think the biggest thing that I've always taken away from it, and I think people are starting to now understand in their minds. I think they're starting to get that voice is big, but they're seeing what's happening with Alexa and Google, and and all, and like the voice activated stuff, and the interactive stuff and all that. But I think really what it all comes down to is being more intentional about your use of sound, right? And I think people for a long time have understood, if you pulled the average marketer aside and said, hey, do you understand how powerful sound is for people as an emotional driver? They would all say, yeah, oh yeah, I get that. Sound is great. Well, what do you do for sound, with your, with your website, with your presentations, with your, with all the different touch points you have, your in store, your, whatever
With your
happens.
IVR.
They say, well, we spend a lot of time on our visual branding, and then our agency fills in sound. I was like, well, that's the problem, right? Because you're being really intentional about everything until that last touch point, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. If anybody would listen to me about audio branding, the first thing I would say is, what does your brand sound like, right? And if you don't know, why not, right? And you should be able to have a really specific answer about that, right? And what are you doing intentionally with your sound? What is your sound meant to communicate? What is your sound meant to encourage, right? And those things I think most brand marketers even today cannot answer.
Oh, completely agree. Completely agree. So let's talk a little bit more about your book.
Yeah.
What made you choose to write the book, Be Vigilant: Strategies to Stop Complacency, Improve Performance, and Safeguard Success? Your business and life depend on it. Now, at least what I've read of the book, it looks, this has a very heavy influence, and obviously from the title as well as what you're doing as a sheriff's deputy. But what made you sort of pivot in that direction as well?
Yeah. It's a great question. When I started the whole sheriff's deputy thing, it was not something that I was planning on doing in life. It was an opportunity that came up. It was a Facebook post I saw, quite honestly, and then I kind of got into it, and it turned into this huge part of my life now. But when I went into the academy, one of the first, I started, when I started doing it, I was thinking to myself, this is going to be a completely different experience than everything I've done before. And I think I felt like coming into it with my life experience was going to be beneficial. So my ability to deal with people and to, manage through problems and all those things, which it has been, that's been super beneficial bringing that in. I didn't really expect anything to come back from it, towards my other parts of my life. But what I started seeing right away is that there was a lot that I was learning in the academy, as a 45-year-old guy in a police academy, right? There's a lot of things that I was learning that I could immediately frame in terms of, this has direct relevance back to my personal life or back to my business life. And so one of those things that immediately became clear was this thing that we talk about right from the very start, which is this idea that complacency kills, right? So, you probably heard the saying, police work is 99%, routine and 1% craziness, right? Which is true. Most of the time things go right. Until they go very wrong. And we just had a terrible example of that here in Colorado last week. And so, those are things where, most of the time it doesn't go that way. Your calls are not like that 99.9% of the time. But you have to stay ready for that whenever that happens. And so a lot of what we learn throughout our entire career in law enforcement is how to remain vigilant when vigilance is not the easy thing to do, because it's easier just to do things normal like they've worked out 1,000 times in the past, right? And so we do a lot of things every day that help us remain vigilant, right? And that's where I started looking and I say, well, gosh, complacency is not just detrimental in law enforcement. It also, destroys businesses. It destroys brands. If you want to think about Blockbuster or Sears or Circuit City, or, you can, whatever ones you want to name off the top of your head that were once great brands that then had a huge fall, you can always trace it back to some level of complacency, to things that now you look back and say, how did they not see that coming? How did they not know that they were vulnerable in that way? But they didn't in the moment. If you look at, relationships, most failed relationships, you can at some point in time attribute back to an element of complacency, where people got comfortable and confident and overconfident, and forgot about what are the things that we need to do to make this work, right? And so that's what the book was. That was the idea for the book. Is I said, well, guys, there's so much that I'm learning here that I'm able to apply back to my business life, to my personal life. And so the book became, an understanding of what complacency is, because we all talk about complacency. You can't watch, a sports game without someone saying, oh, they're getting complacent. But nobody ever talks about, people will say, don't get complacent, with coronavirus or COVID. Hey, let's not get complacent now, right? But nobody ever talks about what that actually means. Like, what do you have to do to not be complacent, other than just not be complacent, right?
Well, exactly. You don't want to create an environment where people can't be at least at rest. But what I really enjoyed about, especially what I read from the first chapter, is just looking at the vigilance check. And it was really exploring to yourself, what does it mean to be complacent? Like, I don't know that most people even think about that. I do.
Oh,
The same way as a diver, or as when I've done martial arts most of my career. And I taught combatives, just as you learned as a cop. When you learn situational awareness, when you learn to basically always be learning, and from your surroundings and your environment, it gives you a different appreciation to not be complacent. And stagnation is what's killed so many brands. But I love the fact that you're asking, what conditions or attitudes make complacency more likely. I love that. I like the question, where are you most vulnerable to be complacent?
yeah.
These are really good questions that people and brands, I mean, any marketer can read this book, not a sheriff's deputy, and see
No,
the exact same
look,
thing. Any
yeah.
leader anywhere can read this and think, these are the kind of questions I need to ask.
Well, and the book is filled with examples. Law enforcement is my basis of where I draw the things that we do, but the book is filled with examples from business and marketing and brand, in terms of how do you actually make this work and how do you apply. I mean, here's a great example. So you're a diver. I don't know much about diving, but I can make some assumptions, right? So one thing I would assume is that you go through some sort of checklist every time before you go
Sure.
diving to check your equipment, right? Now, probably every time you do it, your equipment's fine, right? And if you didn't have that habit in place to go through your checklist, you might be inclined to skip some of those things, because, I mean, how many times are you going to check it and it's all going to be okay, right? And then you just assume it's okay. Well, without that checklist, without, one of my chapters is about creating habits, right? Because with diving, right, if one of those things, the going through that checklist every time, even though it always works out fine for you, the one time that it wouldn't work out fine could be deadly.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why you have to have that thing. You were talking about handshakes, before
Yeah.
we went live.
Yeah.
One of my things that I talk about in that chapter is how, even before this pandemic, I stopped doing handshakes. Okay. So I don't do handshakes, and a lot of people in law enforcement don't do handshakes, not because we're germaphobes, although that's what it would seem like now, but because it puts me at a tactical disadvantage,
Absolutely.
right? So when I put my hand out, I'm right-handed. That's my gun hand. If I put my hand out, I've now given up my hand to somebody, right? And I've made myself vulnerable. Now, 999,909,999, whatever number of times out of whatever, it's going to turn out just fine,
Yeah.
right? But what it requires me to do, if I sometimes do a fist bump, right? And if I do a fist bump, I'll use my left hand, right? And if I sometimes shake hands, well, now sometime each time I have to use some sort of criteria to decide which I'm going to do, right? And so I'm probably going to make the decision based on whether you look threatening, what I know about you, what you're wearing, what our environment is, where we are, right? So I'm going to make that decision. Eventually, I'm going to make the wrong decision, because I'm going to put that hand out without doing the thought process, right? So my habit is to just fist bump no matter what I do, right? Your habit is to go through your checklist. A pilot goes through their checklist every time they fly a plane, right? In business, there are also things that we do every day that most of the time go right. But if we mess it up, the consequences are pretty drastic, right? And
Great
so,
point.
this is a great way in business to remain vigilant, to to institutionalize things that you need to do where the consequences are much greater than the cost of looking at it each time.
So, Lynn, what do you do for fun when you're not writing a book, running a conference, or thinking about brand marketing or being complacent?
Yeah, well, I mean, my family. I got my family and my daughters, and one of my daughters is really heavily into volleyball, so that takes up a lot of free time.
Yeah.
Is club volleyball. If I'm completely on my own and doing my own thing, it's usually poker.
Nice.
I do love poker, and poker is another. It fits right in with everything because there's a lot of things you can learn from poker too, in terms of taking back for business and in terms of vigilance.
So I asked this of everybody, shark is my brand. I'd like to know, what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
So my I don't know anything about sharks. I'll be
Okay.
completely honest with you. However,
Not a lot of them in the Denver area.
well, I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up
Okay.
in New York.
In New
So
York,
I
yeah.
mean, and I've been fishing in Florida. So
Yeah.
but I still don't know anything about sharks. But when I joined my fraternity in college, Zeta Beta Tau, one of my big brother, my fraternity big brother, his fraternity nickname was Mako.
Nice.
And he's a big fisherman, a big boating guy. And so I'd have to say Mako is my favorite shark.
Okay. Perfect. Well, Lynn, it's that favorite time in the show. I ask everybody kind of a series of questions so we get to know you a little bit better. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting questions that you're going to be asked today?
Absolutely.
All right. So a couple of these are places where you worked as well. So we're going to kind of dive into that. You
Okay.
worked for Campbell. So question 1 is chicken noodle soup or tomato soup?
It's funny because I worked on both.
Oh, nice.
And I actually led efforts on tomato soup for a while, and we did some really cool stuff. So I have an affinity for tomato soup, but my personal favorite is chicken noodle.
Not bad. Not bad. All right. Number 2, as a poker player, Texas Hold'em or 5-card stud?
Oh, definitely hold them. Definitely hold them.
Yeah, I would agree. All right. Number 3, it's a Nabisco product we're going to ask about.
Okay.
I was going to dive into the cookies, but it would be too tough to do that. So Cheez-Its or club crackers?
Huh. I don't. If I had to choose one, now when I worked for Nabisco, I worked in their spreads. So back when I used to own Parquet, so I used to own Parquet. So I worked on the Parquet brand, butter Parquet, right? And then so I didn't even work in the biscuits part of the business, but I would have to say I'm not a big fan of cheesy stuff to begin with. So I would go with the club crackers.
All right. Number 4. So this is going to be this is going to be a Sophie's Choice kind of question, choosing from one of your children. Brand Management Camp Conference or Brand Management Camp University. And I'm basically thinking about the in-person, multi-day experience versus the ongoing throughout the year online learning.
Oh man, now you're putting the screws to me. Here. So this is a cop-out answer, but I'll tell you, just my view of what's going to happen moving forward is that we're not going to have either one of them. It's going to be a hybrid, right? Because there are things that we have learned from the online stuff that we don't ever want to give up, that we think is fantastic. We also don't ever want to give up the live stuff because there's no replacement for that. If I had to choose between the two, if I was making it all about,
if you were about to make a decision, you were going to go all in with one of the two, what would you do?
Yeah, I mean, I would think in terms of what probably provides the most value long-term to our customers, to our consumers, it's going to be the online. I think the online. If I had to choose one, but I don't want to choose one because I think both are super valuable.
And they're both super valuable, and it's very hard to look through the prism of whatever day we're in of the month we're recording this, because 30 days out, it's going to be a new perspective and more people will be vaccinated and everybody will be heading to the beach and everything else. So I don't know. I just know, having just come back from my first conference, that there was a lot more in-person love and appreciation for being in
Right.
person than I even expected. It was,
Well, just to clarify, when you're saying coming back from your first conference, because we were talking about this before we went
yeah,
live,
yeah.
you just went to your first live conference in
First
over a year,
live
right?
in-person conference. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Number
Yeah.
5, and the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Biscuits or cornbread? It's definitely going to be biscuits.
Good man. All right. So Lynn, where do people find out more about you, keep up with the conference, but start looking at getting a copy of the book as you get closer to completion with it and so on?
Yeah. So the first thing is, brandmanagecamp.com. So it's brandmanagecamp.com. That's where all the information on the conference and Brand Manage Camp University is. If you check me out on LinkedIn, Len Herstein on LinkedIn, or you check out Brand Manage Camp on Twitter or Facebook. Those are going to be the places where you'll continue to get information about the book as it becomes. So the book is most likely going to be out in the beginning to mid part of September. So that'll be it. But just connect with me on LinkedIn or connect with me on Twitter. You'll get all the updates, you'll get all the information. And I would love for people to check it out. I think I know I'm biased, but I can tell you this, that I've been around people who have been writing books for a really, really long time. One thing I'll tell you is that it is hard, man. I have a newfound respect for people who write more than one book. It's like when you have more than one kid. You have that first kid, and then when you decide to have a second one, you're like, oh, you already know what's involved in that first one, right?
Yeah, what you do is you get a ghost author or ghost kids.
Yeah, no, I don't have either one of them. And I certainly don't want ghost kids.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I have a newfound respect for authors, and I love it. But it's a book that is built around delivering actionable insights that you can use right away. And so you talked about the vigilance questions at the end. Those are at the end of each chapter. Every chapter has questions for you to ask yourself that you can then take the learnings from that chapter and apply it to your business, to your life, wherever you can. And you will find that you will walk away thinking about things that you can do right away. How do you keep your threats in front of you? You'll learn what survivorship bias is. You'll learn about this idea of the OODA loop and getting off the X, and just briefing and debrief. There's each chapter has its own things that you can use right away. So I hope you get a chance to check it out, and hope you will.
Absolutely. Lynn, thank you very much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Yeah, my pleasure. Keep swimming.
So there was my conversation with Len Herstein, the CEO and president of Manage Camp, the founder of the Brand Manage Camp Conference and the Brand Manage Camp University, the author of Be Vigilant, and he also serves as a Reserve Sheriff's Deputy. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, I met Len through Clubhouse, so it only made sense to start off with a comment about social media. He makes a great point about social that we need to revisit always for brands and with people, but really make it about them. Make it about the audience you're having this conversation with. Don't listen to all the advice that simply pointed to just the one you see in the mirror. It's not always about you, whether it's a personal brand or a large CPG brand. This is a social conversation where you're interacting with your audience, having a conversation. Make it about them. Second, love his focus and reasoning for calling his own conference Brand Manage Camp as opposed to Marketing Manage Camp. Again, your customers, they're not going to give you a marketing trophy. So even with your marketing and messaging, put it at least through the lens of their eyes and not just your own or your agency's. Big CPG brands often just do the same thing and keep pushing through that narrative regardless of what's going on. But look through your customer's eyes at your brand. Third, being vigilant is not the easy thing to do. It's tough. Complacency, though, can kill off a business as quickly as anything. It can do it to brands, it can do so in relationships, and he said it can literally kill someone in law enforcement. So become self-aware. Even as a brand, know your surroundings. Learn where you're vulnerable. And a big shout out and thank you to all the men and women who serve honorably in law enforcement. It's a ridiculously tough job. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. I'm so thankful to everyone who listens. Thank you to my amazing sponsors, Invoke and Drips. Be vigilant, don't be complacent, keep swimming, and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.